Breaking news out of Poland. The military there accusing Moscow of an act of aggression after Polish and NATO forces scrambled to shoot down Russian drones that violated its airspace. Prime Minister Donald Tusk has confirmed a military response operation is underway following multiple airspace violations. Polish and NATO jets were scrambled following reports from Ukraine's Air Force that Russian drones were headed towards the country's airspace. During the incident, Polish authorities shut down several major airports, including Warsaw International, and urged its citizens to stay indoors. The exact number of Russian drones over Poland remains unclear. We're joining us now for more is CNN military analyst and retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. Thanks so much for joining us.
You bet, Linda. Always good to be with you.
So this marks the first time Poland has taken direct military action against airborne threats from Russia crossing into its territory since the war began. Just how significant is this moment?
It's very significant, Linda. One of the key aspects of this is the fact that the Poles felt compelled to shoot down at least some of the drones. Now, we don't know, as you mentioned, how many drones or even where they actually fell in Polish territory, but it's pretty clear from some of the postings that we've seen from Polish government officials that drone fragments can be found on Polish territory. So the Polish authorities are looking for those drone fragments. They've asked people to make sure that they stay away from those fragments, but that they inform the police that those fragments are there and that they can actually be located. So the Poles are obviously a frontline state. They're clearly sensitive to this kind of violation of their airspace. And it really marks the first time that there's been a concerted effort, not by the Russians, to potentially take their drones into Polish airspace, but also a concerted effort by the Poles to respond with strength to these kinds of actions by purportedly by the Russians. So it's a major change in the tenor of the basically frozen conflict that has existed between Poland and Russia up until this point.
Yeah, exactly. This isn't the first airspace violation by Russian drones, but certainly the first time Poland has activated its air defenses, scrambled its fighter jets. From a military perspective, what does this reveal about Poland's readiness to respond?
Well, what it looks like, at least right now, is that the Poles have a very heightened state of alert. And, obviously their alert phase has increased quite a bit because of the incursion of these drones. But the fact that they were able to respond so quickly indicates that they were already in a heightened state of alert. And that very fact is, I think, symptomatic of them being a frontline state, basically because they border both Ukraine and Belarus. Ukraine, of course, engaged in the war with Russia, Belarus, a Russian ally. And it also shows that with heightened tensions, there's an exercise that the Russians are going to be conducting with Belarus starting on Friday. That is going to also cause the Poles to have heightened readiness state and a heightened alert state. They've closed the border with Belarus, and that also indicates that they have been looking at this for quite some time from an intelligence perspective and, of course, from a force deployment perspective as well.
So what's your perspective on Russia's objective? Is it deliberately provoking NATO, testing its rules of engagement?
When you look at the way the Russians have conducted these kinds of operations, you have to suspect that there is a deliberate approach that they're taking here. And that deliberate approach in this case would very much be to test Polish defenses. They want to see how quickly the Poles respond to these kinds of actions, what kinds of measures they take, what kind of jets are they scrambling, how often, from which airports, from which air bases, what are their procedures for civilian responses to this, such as shutting down their civilian airports like the Warsaw Airport, as you mentioned. So they're looking at all of these things. They're trying to assess how quickly the Poles will respond to an incursion of this type, and they can kind of assess them based on these actions that they are witnessing on the part of the Polish government. They can then determine whether or not they have to change their efforts if they want to support surprise Poland at some future point, or if they're just assessing it from an intelligence perspective. But clearly it has operational significance for the Russians. And I firmly believe that they're assessing this from an intelligence perspective, and they probably want to operationalize those findings at some point in the future.
Colonel Cedric Leighton, always great to get your analysis. Thanks so much for joining us.
You bet, Linda. Anytime.